Oh, Tom?
Yes, hello. Is that Rick?
Yeah, I just want to make sure we're in communication here.
Yeah. Um, yeah. Huh. It wasn't easy, but I think I have it.
Great.
Janet had. Yeah. All right. Let's see here. I think we have some people from outside of Toledo area. So I'm going to give people a minute or two. I think we have a full hour.
Okay.
So I don't know if that helps or not, but I do have a couple of questions. Jay, can you hear me? Okay. Let's see, how do I get,
I see him on there. He needs to
yeah,
unmute.
I'm trying to unmute the people.
He can do it on his, if he goes on his screen down to the lower left.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm muted. I can hear you fine.
Okay, all right. Well, welcome, Jay. Let's see
Thank you,
here.
appreciate it.
Sure. Okay.
Hello.
Hello. Let's see.
Oh, that's your wife there, huh? No?
Well, somebody else is connecting here. I can see. Yep. All right, Rick. Welcome. I'm Thomas Wabluski, and I conduct a book club at our local library. So it's a SABR Northwest Ohio and Sanger Baseball Book Club. And today we have Rick Huhn outside of Columbus, Ohio, and he's going to talk to us about Eddie Collins. And I think, Rick, you're going to talk for a while, and then we'll have some questions and answers from everyone. Does that work?
Yep, sounds good. Yeah, if everybody could just kind of hold off, because I'm just going to talk a little bit about Eddie, some of his early years, and then turn it over. I'm sure people have questions, and we can get to what everybody really wants to know. So if you're ready, I'm ready.
Okay.
Tom, you ready for me?
I'm ready. Go ahead, Rick.
Okay, as Tom said, I'm Rick Huhn. I'm from down the road in Westerville, Ohio. Been up to Toledo many times. And in fact, I spoke to the Toledo Book Club about a year and a half ago. It was by phone. We didn't have things like Zoom so readily available back then, but I spoke on the Black Sox scandal, which in some ways involved the player that I'm going to talk about today, and that's Eddie Collins. When Tom approached me about speaking to the group, he mentioned that the book club was going to be reading about major league infielders and choosing books about major league infielders. And he knew that I had written a book about Eddie Collins, actually about 12 years ago. So it's not a recent book, but still very relevant. In that Eddie Collins is still regarded as one of the very best infielders and certainly one of the very best second basemen in baseball history. I'm sure that there is a list out there that doesn't include Eddie in their top 5 as far as second baseman, but I've never seen one. He's usually one of the people listed when they list the top 5 second basemen of all time. And I think it's a justly deserved honor for him to still be among those after all these years, because quite frankly, Eddie was born in 1887 and died in 1951. So we're talking about 69 years. So 69 years after his death, he's still considered one of the very, very best ever to play the game. So I'm going to keep this kind of casual as far as what we're going to talk about. I don't have a presentation as such with slides and all that today. We kind of got this together just in the last few days as far as me taking part here. So I'm just going to kind of keep it going. And then when I'm finished, we'll open it up for questions, and I hope some of you have some good questions to ask, and then we'll move on from there. So what I've decided to talk about today is Eddie's early period, because there's a lot known about his baseball career, and we can get into that with various questions as we go along, but the early days are not so well known. And so I think that it still would be of some interest because you kind of want to know where somebody got to the place that they were able to become a Major League Baseball player and certainly go on to stardom from there. As I said, Eddie was born in 1887 in Millerton, New York, very small town in upstate New York. And his father, John, worked for the New York Central Railroad. Back then, that was a huge, huge enterprise. And he had a good job with the railroad. In fact, at one point, he was named the freight agent for two of the main New York Central lines, rail lines. And in order to take part in this new assignment, he was required to work out of Grand Central Terminal in New York City. If you recall the SABR convention in New York a few years ago, that was held at a hotel that was connected to Grand Central Station. Well, this is essentially where Eddie Collins' father, John, began to work. And in order to work there, he had to move from Millerton, which was upstate, to somewhere closer to New York, and he chose Tarrytown, New York, which is about an hour's train ride from Grand Central Station. So his father could take the train to the terminal down there with a 1 hour train ride. So Eddie essentially grew up in Tarrytown, which is the home of Washington Irving, of literary fame. So naturally, there was a school in Tarrytown called the Irving Institute, named after Washington Irving. Later, it became known as the Irving School. This was not a public school. Most of Eddie's friends went to the public schools, but this was a private school, and I never was able to totally ascertain how Eddie was able to afford to go there, maybe through some scholarships or whatever. At any rate, I doubt if his parents had the money for a full tuition to this school, because this was a school that was attended by the sons of very wealthy individuals, not just in New York, but from around the country. In fact, years later, a young man from a wealthy family named Tom Yawkey attended this same Irving Institute, by then known as the Irving School. And by that time, the school, because of Eddie's attendance there and going on to become a Major League Baseball star, the school had a medal in Eddie's honor. Tom Yawkey won the medal on two occasions. Did not win it. He was the runner-up on two separate occasions. And he idolized Eddie Collins, and that would turn out to be something for Eddie and Tom later in life. When Yawkey determined to buy the Boston Red Sox years later and become the owner of the Red Sox, he reached out for Eddie Collins, who by then was at the end of his playing days, and brought him aboard as his general manager and offered Eddie a part ownership, somewhere probably underneath 10%, but 10% on down. But anyway, he had an ownership share, became a general manager, eventually a vice president of Tom Yawkey's Boston Red Sox, starting with the 1930s. But anyway, back to Tarrytown. Eddie was a good athlete right from the start and showed a lot of interest in baseball, but also in football. He played football at the Irving Institute and was the tailback or running back, as it was at that time, for the team, and was a star. and was also a star in baseball, where he was a pitcher. Of course, a lot of younger and top athletes pitch in baseball when they first get started, but he was a pitcher and an infielder, playing primarily shortstop for the school. Anyway, he, as I said, starred there and was a good enough athlete that when he graduated, he moved on and decided he wanted to go into law, and went to Columbia down in New York City. Columbia was an Ivy League school, and it was back then one of the power conferences in the United States. And so when he got down to Columbia, he became involved and tried out for the football team and as well as baseball, and actually was the quarterback of the freshman team and the captain of the freshman team for Columbia. In baseball, he also showed a lot of promise and was a star in the making, and he played shortstop in baseball. One of the interesting things about Columbia is that during the season, they would occasionally play major league teams. They had, of course, the Highlanders and the Giants locally at the time, so that he got to play some baseball. In fact, played a game with the Giants and did fairly well. Interestingly enough, John McGraw watched him, but didn't think enough to reach out to him and try to make an offer later on as Eddie progressed. During Eddie's second year in school, for some reason he didn't go out for football. Again, starred in baseball. The teams weren't really terrific while he was there, but he was definitely a star. We don't have his statistics. It was they didn't keep the statistics back then, but articles from the time indicated that he hit 400 in baseball at least two seasons, and he was coming right along with baseball. For some reason, didn't play football, but then in his junior year came back and decided he wanted to play football again. By then, the quarterback of the team was a fellow named Wild Bill Donovan. Not the one that played Major League Baseball, but also a famous man in his own right. He went on to become the head of the OSS, which later became the CIA. And so he was the first string quarterback, but he got hurt. And in the mid-season of Eddie's junior year, and Eddie went on to become the quarterback and really gave a good accounting of himself. He did quite well, and really enjoyed football. And there are some that have said that he liked football better than baseball, but I'm not totally sure of that. I think he liked them both. So now we're up to his summer of his junior year at Columbia. And Eddie was good enough in baseball that he got offers to come up, head north to the Northern League, which was a semi-pro league up in the New York, Vermont area. And he was assigned to the Plattsburgh, New York team. Let me just drop back a second and tell you that when he was at Columbia, his coach was a fellow named Billy Lauder, Lauder, who had played some Major League Baseball and was quite good. And Eddie always felt that Lauder was a big part of why he became a good baseball player. He thought he was well schooled by Lauder. And when he got up to the Plattsburgh team, he had another coach with a professional background named Billy Lush, Lush. And again, Eddie gives a lot of credit to Lush for schooling him in baseball with the fundamentals and things that eventually made him great. So he had some really good coaching from two individuals with Major League Baseball careers. While he was up there, I had a teammate named David Sheen, who eventually would also go on to play some Major League ball. So the Northern League was kind of a crazy league. They had the various teams had city rivalries back then, and it was very fierce. And they also had financial difficulties, so you never knew if you started with the team if through the summer of this semi-pro league whether you would make it with the same team or you might have to switch or drop out entirely. Anyway, before that summer was over, he was also the Plattsburgh team fell apart, and he ended up playing with Rutland, which was a Vermont team. Again, really showing signs that he had some potential. And he started drawing some interest. Of course, one of his backers was his own coach, Billy Lush. It was said that Lush wrote a letter to Connie Mack extolling the virtues of Eddie Collins. And but that may or may not have been the case, or what turned Mack's attention to Eddie, because another player for Connie Mack with the Philadelphia Athletics was a fellow named Andy Coakley, a pitcher that some of you might be familiar with. He was a good pitcher, and he happened to be on, I believe, his honeymoon is what the story goes, and came over and watched some games with the Rutland, Vermont team, and was very impressed with both David Sheen and in particular Eddie Collins, and tipped off Connie Mack to Eddie. Of course, most of us know of Connie Mack, and I won't go through all that, but he was already starting his baseball legend. In fact, his Philadelphia Athletics in 1905 had played in the World Series against the Giants. But in 1906, he was looking for some help, and impressed enough with the rave reviews on Collins that he asked to meet Eddie in New York City to discuss Eddie's future. So they met in September of 1906 in a hotel in New York. Eddie was very dubious about this. It was coming awfully fast for him. He didn't know a whole lot of what to do, but he was smart enough and astute enough, even as a young man, when he met with Connie Mack. When Mack offered him a contract for 1907, which the idea being that Eddie could finish his college career in 1907 at Columbia and then come on with the Athletics, Eddie said he would only do that if it was a no trade contract, which said that he could not be traded without his consent. What he was worried about is he'd heard about these fellows that were signed up, these youngsters, and then their contracts were sold to minor league teams or other major league teams, and he didn't want any part of that. If he was going to sign with the Athletics, he wanted to play with the Athletics. He always kind of had a preference for playing with a New York team, so that could have been in the back of his mind. But another thing that I think this story shows is that by going to the Irving Institute, where he got his high school education, he was around some very astute people, and he developed a very strong business sense and a business attitude that set him apart from a number of other baseball players at that time. Maybe even a little bit of a snobbery, as some people will recall that Eddie Collins' nickname is Cocky. And so maybe a little of that came from that. But anyway, he was very self-assured as a young man, enough so that he dealt across the table with Connie Mack, who, as I said, was already a baseball legend in the country. And before he left, this was in September. I think they met like September 9th. The Athletics still had a few games remaining, and Connie Mack offered an opportunity for Eddie to play a few games. Said, "Would you like to come?" Because Eddie's summer had ended early. As I said, the Northern League kind of had teams that fell apart. The league pretty much fell apart, and Eddie did play in Connecticut for a few games, but he still had a gap in between when his senior year at Columbia would start and the end of the baseball season. So Eddie said, okay. He thought maybe he would do that. Of course, there was some some concern on Eddie's part because he had played semi-pro ball, and he also would probably be paid, as his understanding, with the athletics. But Connie Mack took care of all that because he said, I won't have you play with us as Eddie Collins. He had some concerns because some of the reporters that reported up in Boston, et cetera, might have seen Eddie play in this Northern League, including a former baseball player and sports editor of one of the Boston papers named Tim Murnane, who some of you might be familiar with. Anyway, so Connie says to Eddie, I'm going to have you play as Eddie Sullivan. So if you look in the record books for 1906 and you look for Eddie Collins, you're not going to see, well, you might see it now today on Baseball Reference, but in the early books, there was no reference to Eddie Collins. It was Eddie Sullivan. Eddie, in fact, did play. His first game was September 16th of 1906 against the Chicago White Sox. And who should the White Sox pitch but a man named Ed Walsh, a Hall of Famer in his own right. So the competition was tough, but Eddie got a base hit and a walk in that first game and showed that maybe he did belong. So we're up to that debut game. So what happens the rest of 1906? Not a whole lot. Eddie came to bat 15 times. He got 3 base hits, a walk or 2. When the Athletics left Philadelphia to go on the road, Connie said, I don't think we should take a chance on taking you out on the road where a lot of eyebrows might be raised. Let's preserve your eligibility for your senior year at Columbia. And so Eddie went back to Columbia. But as soon as he got there, he ran into trouble. Many writers say that it was because Eddie was paid by the Athletics to play, but my research showed, and I think the better angle on this is that they had been tipped that at Columbia, they'd been tipped off that Eddie had played semi-pro ball. He denied that he'd been paid, but he had been paid, and he lost his senior year of eligibility. He was allowed to coach the team, however, but he also wasn't allowed to play football because football was banned in many schools in 1907 because of issues of the dangerousness of the sport. So Eddie was not able to play football, and he was shut out on baseball. As I said, he was a coach. So he went ahead and graduated from Columbia, and this was now the summer of 1907. And he goes to Philadelphia to play with the Athletics. Didn't play a whole lot. In fact, I don't want to misquote myself, so I'm going to make sure I've got the amount that he played. I think he played in about, well, he only had just a few at-bats that year and didn't necessarily equate himself on the field or with his bat. In 1907, he played in 14 games. He arrived late, but anyway, he did not hit all that well. One of the problems with Eddie was where to play him. At that time, he'd been a shortstop. He played a little bit of second base, but not much. They tried him a little bit at second, a little bit at shortstop, and in the outfield, but the Athletics had a good second baseman. They had more of a need for a shortstop. They had a good second baseman at the time, Danny Murphy. But Eddie started hitting in 1908 to the point that they needed his bat in the lineup. So in a stroke of genius, as Connie Mack was wont to do, he moved Danny Murphy to the outfield, installed Eddie Collins towards the latter part of the season at second base, where he became a fixture immediately. He played 47 games in 1908 at second base. He batted .273 overall. He was in 102 games for the year, and then started 1909 on a trek to stardom. 1909 was his first full season playing. He played the entire year. He was a second baseman for an improving athletics team that was starting to show signs of their greatness. And in 153 games, he batted .347. And remember that batting average was a big part of baseball back in the dead ball era, the era that we're talking about now. And he stole 63 bases, which was, again, stolen bases were a big thing in the dead ball era, and he was one of the leaders in the league. And then in 1910 is when he really broke out. Didn't hit quite as good in 1910. He hit .324 during the regular season, led the league in stolen bases with 81 stolen bases, and was the star of the 1910 World Series. If you recall, the Athletics played the Cubs in the 1910 World Series. Eddie was the star of the series. He hit .429 in the series. The Athletics knocked off the Cubs, and over the next 5 years, they would play in 4 World Series, winning in 1910, 1911, 1913, and then in 1914, they were upset 4 straight by the Miracle Boston Braves. So I've kind of brought you up to date on where we are. One of the other things I wanted to discuss, mainly because Tom asked you folks a question, and that was with his trivia questions about the $100,000 infield. This was a famous infield that the Athletics had, $100,000 at that time being their value, and that kind of shows you where we've come. That wouldn't even cover a third of the season of play of one of the lower salaried major leaguers today. But it was a terrific infield. At third base, you had Frank Home Run Baker, Hall of Fame. Shortstop was Jack Berry, who was a terrific player who went on to also do some managing. At second base was Hall of Famer Eddie Collins, and at first base was kind of an unsung hero, Stuffy McInnis, who was one of the best fielding first basemen of all time and was a lot better hitter than most people realize. It was a terrific infield, and of course, Eddie was a part of that. So I'm going to stop there, and we've got a lot of career to cover, and we can do some of that with questions, and I can fill in the blanks as we go along. But he played overall 25 seasons of baseball, one of the longer baseball careers that anybody's ever had. And then he went on to a long career as a general manager and vice president with the Red Sox. And as I said, he passed away in 1951 at the age of 63. So, Tom, I'm going to turn it over to you and open it up for some questions, and we'll go from there.
All right. Okay, I'm going to ask everyone to unmute themselves, so if they want to ask a question, we can hear it. Rick, you mentioned that he played under an assumed name, Eddie Sullivan.
Correct.
Any reason, can you tell us a little bit how Sullivan was selected for him to use?
Connie Mack came up with the name. My guess is Eddie Collins was Irish American, and Sullivan's Irish American name, as far as I know, at least generally. And I have a feeling that that had something to do with it. I really don't know exactly why, other than, as I said, Connie Mack suggested the name and it fit.
Okay, all right. I know many players in that time had superstitions. Did Eddie Collins have any?
He had a ton of superstitions. He was a very superstitious baseball player, but again, like you said, he wasn't alone in that. I'd say the majority of them were. One crazy one that he had is that he liked to chew gum, and he had a habit of when he came to bat, he'd take the gum out of his mouth and he'd stick it up under the bill of his cap, and he was very fidgety batter. And one time he put that up there, and with with 2 strikes on him, he got fidgety and decided, boy, I need to chew some gum. So he reached up and he got the gum, stuck it in his mouth, and got a hit. And from then on, he could not be without that gum, and it's always going to be on his cap. But if he got down 2 strikes, he was going to put that gum back in his mouth and chew it. And he said, I didn't always get a hit when I did it, but I felt comfortable doing that. Another superstition that he had that I recall is that he always placed his glove in a certain position. And nobody better move that glove. It had to be where it was, because if you recall, the players after the 3rd out was made, they'd throw their gloves down. They didn't, that's changed over time, but the gloves would be out there. He did not want anybody messing with that glove. Nobody should bring that glove in. It had to be right there when he came back out. He had a ton more, but those are the 2 that come to mind.
Okay, good. Do you have any comments about the time that he was the general manager and Tommy Yawkey was the Boston owner, and they had Jackie Robinson come out for a tryout?
Yeah, I think Eddie missed the boat on that one, but we don't know the whole story. We probably never will know the whole story on that. A councilman in Boston had been pressing for some time, and there'd been a movement in the Boston papers and, of course, in New York and various places to integrate baseball and to give black baseball players a chance to play in the game. And with the pressure on, the Red Sox decided to hold a tryout, and they had 3 players come. I think one was Sam Jethro, Jackie Robinson, and I'm sure the 3rd one will come to mind at some point later on in the day, but I can't place it right now. But anyway, they had the 3 come in and gave them a tryout, and they did not make an offer. And there's a lot of has been written about what went on. There were some invectives yelled from the stands. One writer said it was Eddie Collins. I don't believe that it doesn't match anything I ever found about Eddie. What I did find about him was what I alluded to earlier, and that is that he saw himself in the upper echelons of society, so to speak. And he was not a man who was going to overturn an apple cart. If his marching instructions were baseball wasn't ready to integrate and have African-American ball players, he would not be the one to do it. And in my book, I said that I thought he missed the golden opportunity. Had he done that, he might have been the Branch Rickey. He had the first opportunity and he missed it. He could have signed Jackie Robinson. Jethro was a terrific player himself. So he missed the boat on that one.
Yeah, Jethro also was a Toledo Mud Hen in the early 50s, one of the early black players for the Hens. Many ball players, Roger Hornsby is one, Ted Williams, another, Hall of Fame ball players who became managers. You want to give us your insight into his managerial capabilities and success or unsuccessful?
Right. For those who don't know, Eddie played in Philadelphia with the Athletics until 1914, and then he was traded to the Chicago White Sox of Charles Comiskey, and was with the White Sox through the Black Sox scandal into the 1920s, and was given a chance due to some illnesses and various other things to manage for part of the season in 1924 with the White Sox, and then was named the manager of the White Sox in 1925. If you'll recall, the White Sox were on the edge of a baseball dynasty starting in 1917. Of course, 1918 was interrupted with the war years. 1919, again, they won the pennant and were highly favored to win the World Series. But they lost that, of course, to the Cincinnati Reds and what became known as the Black Sox series. And the due to the scandal. And then 8 of the players were dismissed in 1920 when they were, again, right up there battling the Indians and the Yankees for the 1920 American League pennant. And with that, they fell apart after those players were banned from baseball because it took the heart of the team right out, even though there still were some Hall of Famers and the nucleus for some good players. The pitching staff was decimated. The infield was decimated. Outfielders, star outfielders were missing. And it went downhill fast. And once the manager, Kid Gleason, was no longer the manager, they started going through managers. So by 1924, when Eddie was the third to manage during that season, when he became the manager in 1925, they weren't the Chicago White Sox that he would have liked to have had. And yet he still in 25 and 26 had winning teams, but they placed 5th both years. His records in 1925, 79 and 75, that was really wasn't too bad for a first-year manager. And in 26, 81 and 72, showing improvement again at 5th place. But he wasn't really very close with Charles Comiskey. They were not. It was not a close relationship. Comiskey admired Eddie as a baseball player, but he was paying him an awful lot of money compared to the other players, and that wasn't Commie's favorite thing, especially once the team wasn't doing very well, and he still had to pay him a lot of money. So he had kind of a short fuse at that point, and after 2 years of Eddie being the full-time manager, he named Ray Schalk, who had an equally unsuccessful 2 years. Of course, Schalk was the Hall of Fame catcher, and another Hall of Fame leftover from the 1919 White Sox. So that was his career. So in 26, then he left and he went back with the Philadelphia Athletics, where he was a player and eventually a coach for the Athletics before he went to the Red Sox.
Didn't he have his son as a member of the team?
He not while he was there. Eddie he had 2 sons, Paul, who became a minister, and Eddie Collins Jr., who aspired to be a baseball player and did play for a while. He played with the Athletics in 1939 briefly and went to the minors for a year. Then he played with the Athletics. He was an outfielder in 1941 and 42. Not terribly successful, but he showed a lot of promise for a young man. And then he enlisted in the Navy because the war intervened. And like many others, after the war years, he just was never the same. He actually played a little bit in the Tigers minor league organization, and I believe maybe the Red Sox. I'd have to look that up. But anyway, a couple of different teams, the Giants, I think it was, AAA teams.
Okay.
And but he never made it back to the major leagues.
Yes. I just want to remind everyone that you can use the chat if you want to type in something, and I can read it to Rick. And this is from J. Jordan asking, how did the Black Sox scandal affect him, his reputation, and then the club?
Well, I think I alluded to what it did to the club a little bit. I could go into that more if Jay wants me to. It decimated the White Sox. It took them until 1959 to win another pennant. So 30 years later, before the Go-Go Sox in 1959 won the pennant. But Eddie personally came out of it pretty good because Eddie was part of the team that was not involved with the gamblers. And in fact, he'd been the captain of the team. He was sort of a lightning rod on the team. They were what I call the clean Sox, and then there were the Black Sox players. And the Black Sox players did not like Eddie. Maybe it was because he was sort of aloof at times, a little bit on the, maybe to them on the snobbish side. He had been named the captain. That angered Buck Weaver, who aspired to be the captain of the team. and he'd had a run-in before the first baseman, Chick Candle, even been with the club. But on the whole, he also was being paid a lot more than any of the other players. One of the myths that we kind of dispelled last year, and I talked to you folks about at the meeting last year, was that the White Sox were not paid well by Comiskey, but that's not the case. They were actually one of the better paid teams in the major leagues during that time. But Eddie was making twice as much as any of the other players on the team due to his very good negotiating skills, as we talked about earlier. It didn't end with the Connie Mack no trade clause. He was a tough bargainer, and he was being paid $15,000 a year, which was, I believe, the second highest salary in baseball to Ty Cobb at the time. So that angered some of his teammates. So, you know, within the team, he was kind of a lightning rod, but his reputation was sterling outside of that. And I don't think it hampered him in any way, shape, or form. And it allowed him, as I said, to continue and actually manage the White Sox team, then go on to play and coach with the Philadelphia Athletics, that became another dynasty type team, kind of the second Connie Mack dynasty. And he was a part of that team that played in the World Series several years in a row, and then went on to become a part owner of the Red Sox. He couldn't have done any of that had he been tainted by the Black Sox scandal.
Okay, thanks. Here's a question from Stan. What made you decide on Eddie Collins for your book?
That's a good question. I wrote a book about George Sisler. That was my first venture into baseball writing. I've been a long-time baseball fan, but I was introduced to George Sisler Jr., who was the general manager of the Columbus Clippers. I had never met him before, but a friend of mine introduced me to him, and because he knew I was interested in baseball, and also had done some writing, was interested in doing more writing. And George Jr. kind of over lunch said, you know, one thing I just feel terrible about is nobody ever wrote about my father. And I said, oh my gosh, he's a Hall of Famer. I know somebody's written a book about George Sisler, your dad. And he said, nope, you check it out. So I went home that night, checked it out, and sure enough, nobody had ever written a biography of George Sisler. There were a lot of articles and everything. If you remember, George Sisler had hit 400 two times, was one of the initial inductees into the Hall of Fame. Not the first five, but he was one of the people present at the 1939 induction, where these first great ball players and executives were inducted. And so I said, I'm going to write a book about him. And I asked George Jr. if he would be interested in me doing that. He said yes. So that book came out in 2004. It's called The Sisler, George Sisler, Baseball's Forgotten Great. And I say Baseball's Forgotten Great because while I was researching that, I kept coming upon references to Eddie Collins. And when I was a kid, I used to play the Cadco All-Star baseball game with the spinner and everything. And I recalled all these guys, and I thought, oh my gosh, Eddie Collins was always getting hits. Wasn't getting any home runs. In fact, he only hit 47 in 25 seasons, but he was always on base, getting stolen bases, doubles. If you've ever played the game, you could shake your head. Yes, you'd remember that. And so I thought, well, when I get done with this Sisler book, I think I'll read a biography of Eddie Collins. So I finished the Sisler book while I was was with the publisher before it was published, and I found that nobody had ever written a book about Eddie Collins. So that's essentially, I decided I've got to write a book about Eddie Collins, because to me it was fascinating in that that he wore so many hats in baseball, and he was well known and was actually where Sisler has sort of fallen off the charts a little bit. He's still maybe top 150, but he doesn't always make the top 100. Eddie Collins is usually in the top 25. So I decided this would be a good book. So that's how I did Eddie Collins, A Baseball Biography, if that answers your question.
Yes, yes, yes. Any future books?
Right now, I'm working on a book about Billy Evans. Billy Evans, the Hall of Fame umpire. Again, somebody who I think has just kind of fallen off the face of the earth as far as younger baseball fans. Billy was not only a terrific umpire in the American League for 22 years. He was, first of all, he was the youngest umpire, the youngest ever umpire. But he, after his umpiring career, he became the general manager of the Cleveland Indians. He was around when Bob Feller was signed and involved with that. Was the farm director for the Red Sox under Tom Yawkey and Eddie Collins. Was the president of the Southern League, which was Southern Association, which was a league that survived World War II and actually drew over 1 million fans during World War II. Billy is got Eddie Collins on my mind. Billy is credited with saving and improving that league during wartime. And something that Tom Babluski would be happy about is he became the general manager of the Detroit Tigers for a number of years. I'm finding that interspersed with all this was he was a terrific writer. He was the sports editor of the Youngstown Vindicator for a short time before he and during his early years in umpiring, and wrote a syndicated column. So he was one of the best known baseball writers in America at one time during the from 1910, say to 1925, 26, when he ended his umpiring career and went with the Indians, or the Indians as a GM. So that's my current one. In between, I wrote a book about the Chalmers race that some of you might have taken a look at, the 1910 batting race between, as it came down between Napoleon Lajoie and Ty Cobb for a Chalmers automobile.
Right, right. That brings me to the next question from Janet. The Chalmers Award, that was the forerunner to the MVP?
Well, it sort of was. There were gaps in between. The 1910 award was based on who had the highest batting average. And as it turned out, those familiar with it will know it turned into kind of a public relations bonanza for Mr. Chalmers and a black eye for baseball because it ended in controversy that still kind of goes on today. It's never been totally resolved. And so in 1911, they switched the award. They still gave a vehicle. This time, one was awarded to each, the American League MVP and the National League, and it was voted on by sports writers selected. They became a committee, one for each major league city. A top sports writer would make the selections. And so that went on through 2014. And in fact, Eddie Collins won the award in 2014 as the American League MVP. But then there was a gap of several years, and then it kind of came back in the 1920s. One of the first recipients actually was George Sisler, and that went on for a few years, and there was a gap again before the award came back on. Probably, I'm just going to take a guess now. It's off the top of my head, maybe in the early 1930s. Anyway. When it came back on as the MVP award, that's what we have today. It just continued on. Good question, though.
All right, thank you. Stan asks, back to your Eddie Collins book, did you have the opportunity to talk to any of the Collins family members?
That's a great question, and I wanted to. When I wrote the Sisler book, I had the cooperation of just about the entire family. The only segment of the family I didn't was the Dick Sisler family. Dick, of course, was a Major League Baseball player. He was this kind of the middle son of the three sons, and there was a daughter of Sisler. He had passed away quite a while back, and I didn't get through them, but I had the cooperation of the entire rest of the remainder of the family. So I thought that I would probably be able to do that with Eddie Collins. And I reached out. The only people I could find were the grandsons. There were 2 grandsons. And I reached out to them, and they did respond. To their credit, they responded, but they were not interested in being involved in any kind of a book about their grandfather. I don't know exactly why, the reason they gave me, but I'm not sure what I totally believe it is. They just didn't know him as well as their other grandfather, who happened to be the wife of Eddie Collins Jr. Name was Pennock. And if you're probably familiar with Herb Pennock, the Hall of Fame pitcher, pitched with long career with the Yankees, and then also Jim. He was Eddie's best friend. So somehow the son and the daughter got together and they got married. Well, they claim to know that side of the family a lot better, and maybe that's the case. I kind of thought they were worried that I was going to stir up some controversy over the Jackie Robinson issue. Because Herb Pennock was also involved a little bit in some of the hassling when Jackie Robinson, his first season, when the Phillies, I think Herb was involved with the Phillies, and some of the Phillies players didn't want to be on the same field with Jackie, and so Herb was sort of tarnished with that. Whether that was deserved or not, I have no idea. But that could have played into it a little bit, that they thought, oh boy, this guy's going to come in here and stir everything up. Or it could have just been that they were truthful and they just didn't know him well enough to help me out with a book. So I didn't have any help on that one.
Okay. All right. Do we have any other questions from our listeners this evening? Okay, Rick, I think, let me give a last check to the chat room. The chat room is filled with those questions that we already talked about. So unless we have anything else, I'd like to say thank you, Rick, and thank you for everyone else for attending Rick Huhn's talk about Eddie Collins.
Thanks, Rick.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for having me.
Thanks.
I appreciate it.
All right.
Thanks,
Okay.
Rick. Enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Okay.
I'll see y'all.
All right.
See y'all down the road.
All right.
Okay. All right. Maybe at the World Series.
Okay.
All right.
Take care.
Bye,
Hey,
everyone.
Tom, your logo's backwards.
I'm going to leave so you can all talk about me and be truthful now.
You did a great job.
Thanks, Janet.
All right. Thanks, Rick. Bye-bye.
Hey, Tom, can you switch your logo? It's backwards.
Yeah. Anybody want to say anything before we officially close off?
Good job, Tom, orchestrating this. Good job.
All right. Thanks. Thanks, Dan.
Where is he from, Tom? Where is he
He
from?
lives in Westerville, Ohio, which is a suburb of Columbus.
Okay.
Is he active in the Columbus SABR?
Yes, he is. They have a SABR baseball group, and he is, I guess you could say, second in command.
Okay.
Yeah. So I've gone to a few of their book club meetings that they host at various libraries, and that's where I've met him. He's a Cleveland Indian fan, and he's retired, so that's why the afternoon worked out for him.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Bye,
Anything
everybody.
else on Annette's end, or Stan, or Jan, or Ron?
I'm sorry, I
Richard
missed
or
the beginning
Jay?
of that. That sounded interesting.
Jay, Marilyn,
Yeah, appreciate y'all letting me
Ron's
in. I'm
there.
coming from Baltimore, so don't normally have the opportunity to zoom in, but I'm glad I was able to.
Okay, well, thank you for joining us. Thank you.
Very enjoyable.
Okay, everyone, enjoy the evening and see you around the ballpark.
Bye.
Thanks,
We
Tom.
wish. We wish.
Oh. Stiffened up sitting there. How you? Okay. Oh. Oh, Stan, there's a good breeze coming in that window from over there. Man, if that refreshing. Ooh. Going on anything? Good.
Oh, yeah, sure it is.
Beginning September 8th, TPS will have more than 50 buses delivering meals in the community. Superintendent Durant says some of the buses will go straight to the home. Others will go within blocks of the home. Dr. Durant says meals are the only thing going into your neighborhood. They'll also provide other resources like mental health experts.
How much cash you want, sweetie?
Well, how much are you going to be tipping the guys?
I don't know, what do you think? $10 a piece?
10 or 20?
Continuing to provide for their students and keeping employees on the job.
During times such as this, it's not about unemployed, but it's about maintaining employment of individuals, so we're not contributing to economic downfall.
Because every position can continue to provide services.
Well, I'll put 40 on the refrigerator if you want, and 10 to you.
What do you have?
$1.
Well, you hang on to that 10 for the time being then.
I don't need it. If you... Okay.
Thank you.
portion. District leaders take elementary students at the choice of one option or the other and can't switch until after the first 2 weeks of school. Well, there's a lot of anxiety surrounding that.
With this spring and everything that happened, we've learned a lot. So you want to go back and review what worked well for you and your family and what worked well. And if something didn't work well, you want to try to have that as part of your plan moving forward.
Experts saying if there are any changes coming up that you feel your kids might have trouble, you should probably practice beforehand. Well, there is help available if you're having trouble paying some of your bills. Columbia Gas reminding customers struggling due to COVID-19, they can enroll in a plan. You can head over to ColumbiaGasOhio.com to sign up. You can also call 211 to get in touch with resources if you can't afford your gas bills. The number of coronavirus cases around the globe now topping 42 million tonight. Some countries succeeding in eliminating the virus while others continue to struggle. The World Health Organization continues to warn that it's people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s that are driving the spread of the virus. Many are unaware they're infected with very mild symptoms or do not have symptoms, and resulting in them unknowingly passing on the virus to others. The global coronavirus is now over 780,000 people. Tonight, PETA offering an award for up to $5,000 in an animal cruelty case. Take a look at Ray. Adrian police found the emancipated and abused puppy last July. Illinois County Humane Society complicated whether just whether you recognize Ray or know anything about this case. Crime Stoppers of Winnebago County posted more information about this case over at WTRL.com, also on our news app and Facebook page. 3 people are in jail tonight, charged with connected to a home invasion in Sylvania Township. Police found that inside this abandoned building in central Toledo over Castle and Maplewood. 2 women telling WTOL that $30,000 in weapons and other items were taken during the home invasion, and the 2 tracked down the suspects through Facebook. They called police, who were then able to make the arrest. Morton police on this case at 6. Toledo has something to build a relationship with the community and police with plans of keeping kids away from the gang of life. Call the buyer with a closer look tonight at the plan.
David Ross is an activist in Toledo. He and a group of other Toledoans want to improve the relationship between police and the community by including former or even current gang members in the conversation. People with knowledge of what's happening in the streets and who can become mentors for the youth. So this
Come on, get down. Come on.
Doesn't matter if they're in the gang, doesn't matter what they got right now.
Member was tired of the violence in the state. The number of homicides so far this year is close to surpassing the total number of homicides for all of 2019. The group has already met with members of TPD and is planning to hold an anti-violence peaceful rally September 12th at Smith Park to help foster the relationship between police and the community. Carla Meyer,
Have fun and protect nature. That's what the Mountain Parks plan to do at the Courageous Acres Campground and Lighthouse. The park system recently purchased over 60 acres of land around the camp to help protect rare plant species. The new partnership will also include camp renovations, joint programming, and new trails for public use.
These natural areas have populations of 15
plant species that are listed. These are endangered, threatened, or potentially threatened in Ohio. So these are really high-quality open wings resources that we continue to protect and manage for public enjoyment, as well as providing great opportunities for programs for people with disabilities.
That will allow for opportunities to preserve nature, as well as additional opportunities for the campers that we serve to enjoy the trails and beaches.
Yeah, focusing on people of all ages and developmental disabilities, about 300. For the upcoming school year, right around the corner, health safety John Moss taking us to Ottawa tonight for a new fall walk to improve student safety. Has to be seen in order to go.
Home Catholic School in Ottawa is currently situated in two separate buildings on opposite sides of Locust Street, meaning crossing the street would be much more convenient for the K-8 students here.
So because we have to cross the street so much, it's a danger, anytime you have little kids out here.
In a 3D crosswalk they saw in Scholastic magazine. The school then got approval and funding from the mayor of the city of Ottawa to install their own. Now, any traffic traveling southward on Locust will see this optical illusion of broad streets in the air and hopes it will slow traffic down. And along with the obvious new safety improvements with the new crossing, the school district also used this as an opportunity to teach a lesson to their students as well. Over the summer, the school enlisted some alum now attending Ottawa Randolph High School to find picture points, make the proper measurements, and then paint the crossing. Now, this 3D installment will not only make this road safer for students, but also acts as a prime example of how math can be used in the real world.
Especially for older students, which is the one thing they say, when am I going to use this? I'm never going to use this. So this is just one example of, yes, you are going to use math. Everybody uses math in their real life, so this is just one way that we do that.
St. Peter and Paul Catholic School is set to open their school year on Tuesday, August 25th. Reporting from Ottawa, I'm John Butler, WTOL 11.
Colleges and universities say you got hit in more ways than one right now. To try and stay.
Today will find important information you need to know for the 2020 election.
It may be comfortable right now. My word for the weekend is humid. We'll look at Saturday and Sunday times.
Oh, staff is just marvelous. All your caring, loving people. What would we do without you? And the nurses are right there for you at all times. It's all I really need.
The Ford Summer Sales Event is here with great offers on a huge selection, like 0% APR financing for 72 months across the Ford lineup, America's best-selling brand. It's summer, so grab the family and head out. It's easier now during the Ford Summer Sales Event. Right now, get 0% financing for 72 months on EcoSport, or competitive owners get $6,000 cash back.
The gentleman that did hit me denied everything.
I did ultimately lose my job.
I'm not selling to
He called me
advocate for people who are injured. It felt wonderful that you were proven right.
But just to see the smile.
There's anybody out there could have done a better job for us.
We're like family. We're going to protect you like family.
Summertime savings are here. Get back out there safely in a new Toyota. Go to the lake or you want to hike, catch some air or some fish. If you want to drive the creek or just drive down the road, drive Toyota. Now, $1,500 customer cash on the last of the adventurous RAV4s or $1,000 on RAV4 hybrids. Or lease a RAV4 LE for just $199 a month. This summer, choose the perfect Toyota for your adventure. Today, tomorrow, Toyota. Now more than ever. We just want more people. the entire house for half the price. Plus, take 5 years, no interest, no down payment. Schedule your safe at home or virtual estimate at wallside.com.
The feel of the place, I think it's just the general attitude of the employees and the pride they take in the place. So it's very welcoming.